What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? Some secretary of some branch of a state agency would go on a power trip and stamp "Do not copy" on things that she sent to local agencies. Well, I work for an oversight agency and I needed a copy. Locals were terrified, so I rolled my eyes and called to explain that the locals and I were basically the same entity. Woman started to have a conniption fit, but she got real quiet when I cut her off and said, "Fine, I'll issue a subpoena. What's your name and job title?" She answered, and the sheriff served her a subpoena for what I wanted. Guess she wasn't used to that. It's services for a client of mine. They paid for me to come to their office and address a problem. 8 hours minimum time. The issue was resolved in about 45 minutes. They'd set up something incorrectly, and it was pretty obvious once I got into the system. I was packing up to leave, and the client stopped me. "What are you doing?" Apostrophe. "The system is fixed, so I'm headed out back to my office." Apostrophe. "No. I paid for 8 hours. You'll do your 8 hours. If I tell you to wash my car for 8 hours that's what you'll be doing." Apostrophe. "Right. So anyway, I'm leaving. I'll notify the office to send you the invoice, and in all likelihood we'll no longer be working with you and withdrawing your lease on our equipment." Apostrophe. I worked in management at a theater for a while. If the concession counter was slammed and I was able, I'd leave my post and help them sling popcorn. One night while helping out, a particularly belligerent man started cussing out a 16-year-old girl on a cash register for being too slow, even suggesting she quit since she clearly couldn't handle pushing buttons or scooping popcorn. It was pretty disgusting, and I felt so bad for the girl. I stepped in and told the guy that our employees have the right to refuse service to customers who harass them as part of our anti-harassment/discrimination policy, empathized that the lines were longer than usual, and suggested he should apologize and move on. He was pissed, left half his order on the counter, and started fuming off, anticipating his next move. I went back to my original post that night as manager of the customer service kiosk. Oh boy, the look on his face when he saw me. Didn't want a refund of his tickets though, so I assume he watched the movie without popcorn. I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site. 5 of those years were as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12+ hour days 6 days a week and we were struggling to hire people quick enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as hell from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking shit. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is ducked up and the department manager was a total moron and he would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know shit about my industry, and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him, and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down at my desk, the guy continued to bitch my ear off about everything that was wrong and chastised me for sitting down at my desk when he told me to clean up the site. So I called for a taxi, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only could fire him. I said right. He sheepishly nodded. So I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I can teach anyone how to service equipment, but I don't have a clue how to teach someone to not be an asshole. I grew up with my parents having screaming arguments over every little thing. They do love each other. Over 50 years of marriage so far testifies to that, and it always upset me. A couple of days ago, they popped into my house to visit for a coffee on their way to stay with friends a few miles away. Within minutes, they were yelling at each other. I took great pleasure in telling them that I would not stand for such behavior in my house, and if they didn't lower their voices, they could stand outside until they learned some manners. The meek apologies tasted so sweet, as did the coffee. That would be a customer we had named Nick. I'll leave his last name out to protect the stupid. He would email us and always CCEDITOR at. Common. Most of his emails were things like nothing fucking works. None of the national newspapers responded. I imagine some underling just rolled his eyes and deleted them. Finally he said, "Fix this in 5 minutes or I cancel." My manager says, "Let me see that email." He responded, "Thank you. I cancelled your account. We don't want customers like you anyway. If you want to contact the media, that's your call. I'll happily provide the months of threatening emails you sent to my staff." He gave us months of headaches over a 45/quarter account. We definitely didn't need him. I wasn't good at returning library books when I was a kid. I got lectured by my school librarian about it a lot. Fast forward 20 years and I'm a supervisor at the local public library and my former now retired school librarian goes there. One day I see her sneaking around the front desk instead of coming back to say hi to me, and I immediately figure something's up. I go up to say hi and she acts exasperated and tells me she was trying to avoid me because she had overdue books. So I put on my reading glasses, pulled them down over my nose, and delivered the same lecture she'd given me countless times about being responsible and turning in books on time. My boss calling me at 7 AM on a Saturday to ask if I could lay some flooring for a friend of his at nearly half my normal rate. Yeah. Hard pass, Andy. I started working for a welding company as an engineering manager. We were selling an extremely complex weldment pressure tank that goes under the shitter for 9k. Out costs were 3k. The owner took the bid to get in with this big company. The owner legit said, "We'll make it up in volume." We weren't. Anyway, the buyer for the larger company was a huge bitch and would regularly yell on phone calls. We sent them a letter that we would honor the last 5 tanks on the current PO at the same price. I didn't even want to do that, but after that they were going up to 10k per. She drove down with her boss the next day and demanded an explanation and threatened to pull the business. I replied that we were losing 5k per tank and couldn't do it anymore. She demanded evidence, which I already had pulled up, and simply turned on the projector. I said, "As you can see, we cannot continue to make this part at such a huge loss, and I don't think anyone can make it for the original price. So if you have to pull the business, we understand." Apostrophe. Her boss tripped over himself, cutting her off, and said they weren't pulling out and actually thanked us for honoring the current PO. I didn't have many run-ins with her after that. I had a short stint as private investigator who specialized in providing investigative services to public defenders. We had this one county that was notorious for a sheriff's department that would make BS traffic stops as a pretext to search vehicles. One deputy in particular came up time and time again for this kind of thing. I was asked to interview this deputy for a defense attorney. Deputy had some of the worst report writing skills I've ever seen, riddled with grammar and spelling errors. Quite often, deputy wouldn't even include the reason he pulls people over in his reports. So I go to interview the guy. As part of the process, there's a senior sheriff's rep there that basically is supposed to protect deputies from people like me and keep them from saying things they shouldn't. We sit down, and I pull out his report he wrote on the stop he made on my client's defendant. I've already marked it up, English teacher style, with a red pen, and start with, "I had some trouble understanding your report." I proceeded to go error by error for the purpose of clarifying the report. He's getting redder and redder. I then go into trying to determine why he pulled over the defendant, because it's unclear in the report. He's not able to give a definitive response. All the while, the sheriff's rep, whom I've worked with a lot and who I have seen be very vocal protecting deputies in interviews like this in the past, is silent. Ultimately, charges against client are dropped. Months later, I'm driving through the area on the way home from camping, not speeding or breaking any traffic laws. I get pulled over by a deputy. It's the same deputy. He recognizes me immediately, stammers and manages to say, "It's almost dusk. Turn on your headlights." He gets back in his vehicle and takes off before I've even started my engine. I joined the Army Reserve in 1983, in between my junior and senior year in high school, going to drill one weekend, and we were doing war games with another reserve unit. They mailed everyone a letter with the challenge and response, to be let into the unit. As a lowly private, I was standing guard at the entrance and had to say the challenge. Everything's going good until a city police car pulls up and the cop is a new lieutenant. I give the challenge and he just look at me. I say it again and he said to just let him in because he didn't know it. He starts getting belligerent and I ask him to turn off the car and step out. He gets out and starts yelling at me. The sergeant major heard the commotion and comes over and hears the young lieutenant a new asshole. It was very satisfying to watch, and I learned that day that even though a second lieutenant outranks a sergeant major, it really doesn't matter because the sergeant major had been in for 20 years and didn't put up with any bullshit. I was bartending one night and these 3 guys were absolutely hammered, so I cut them off. One of the guys proceeded to try to argue with me saying he has all this money and he tells me when he's done drinking and has not even drunk. At this point, I'm done trying to be polite and point blank tell him I'm done arguing with him. Will not be serving him and his buddies and he can leave. He looks at me and says now excuse me, who are you to tell me how much I can and cannot drink? I look him dead in the eye and say the ducking bartender, now it's time for you to go. The look on his face was priceless. Never forget the golden rule. Don't piss off your bartender. A few years ago a guy stopped me in the hardware store and asked if I was a painter. I looked down at my painter's whites and said, yeah, I do historical restoration work. He asked how much I charge per hour, and when I told him, he immediately told me I was too expensive and dropped my rate by 25%. I had already given him my number, but he kept belittling me and saying I wasn't worth it. I just told him that I already had a full-time job and this would be in my off hours, so it needed to be worth my while. He finally let me leave the store, then called me 3 or 4 times, each time hemming and hawing over if he wanted to actually use me or not. He's got a bunch of properties. It would be a sweet gig, but not at those prices. And I just kept telling him that's fine. Don't use me if you don't want to. Eventually I recognized his number and stopped picking up. He really thought he had some sort of power over me, and I'd jump at the opportunity. Luckily I didn't have to take the work. I was making good enough money as it was. He would have nitpicked absolutely everything, and probably not paid me at the end anyway. But he was so certain he'd have power in the situation that he didn't seem able to comprehend me not wanting to barter with him. Please subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed this video and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.